So to make these spikes, I want to use the Pyro Trail SOPs right here. And so if you're not familiar with these Pyro Trail nodes, go ahead and check out the node Bible entry for that, because I talk about the whole process there and how you can utilize all these settings. Basically put, we have a Pyro Trail path. If we highlight that and then go down to here, we can see that this is determining that arc. And then we have the trail source, which actually creates the particles following that path. So we could try to do this with the particle simulation. However, I found that with the trail path, it's probably a little bit easier to control exactly what you want. The first thing we want to do is plug in our missile sim points. That again has a start frame attribute. And if we go to trail generation, we can say to use that attribute right here. We'll still have these tentacles flying down, but the arrows actually do start at 30 and then start going out like that. So let's start at the source tab right here. For the initial size, I'll go up just a tad bit on that, about 1.5, 1.6. We can always adjust that later. And under the trail distribution, this is going to be a great way of adding variety. For the number of trails, we want to set this to randomize based on the incoming points. And so we'll say set varying. And that variation here is going to be, I believe, a plus or a minus from the number of trails. With the start spread angle, if we turn this to a value of 0, as well as our spread angle, this is like where things start. So it's like the highest angle that a trail can go when it's trying to shoot out. I think the defaults of 5 are pretty good. And again, we could say set varying and have this variation probably about a value of 5, and then maybe set this to like 7 or something like that. Do realize that this seed is based on the points. So in order to have more variety here, we need to have more points coming into the Pyro Trail path. For that, we can use a point replicate. That will make points per point. Let's say 10 points. And then as we can see here, the seed is going to impact things based on that point. So that's something to keep in mind here with this particular node. Down here at the spread angle, we'll say use attributes and then click on this little dice icon. That will create the attribute adjust float. Oh, it's kind of a mess here. There we go. And once we have that adjust spread angle here, we can say we'd like a middle value of perhaps 7 or something like that. And then with this range length, I believe that's a plus or a minus. So with the spread angle, we want to find that middle value that we like. So if we just turn this up, we can kind of start seeing what this does. And I also think it's a good idea to copy this, paste as a relative reference, and say that the length is going to be this times 0.5. So in other words, if I have a middle value of 14, that range length is going to exist plus or minus half of this value. And so that tends to be a pretty decent way of going about this. Let's go ahead and turn this up until we have the areas pointing as far down to the ground as we can. And then something like that's pretty decent. Maybe we can actually say that this is 0.75. There we go. That's a bit more variety right there. Okay, so that about does it for those guys. Down at the azimuth start angle, we can also change this as well as the azimuth angle. So if you want trails going in one particular direction, you can do that. And you can change where that rotates right here as well. Let's go ahead and take this azimuth angle and say set varying. And we're going to go all the way to 360. And then with this variation, some of these guys are going to concentrate in certain directions. So we could see that right there. And with the start angle, we can also change where some of those guys concentrate as well. So if we say set varying to this as well, we can then change that variation like so. And that might give us a tad bit of variety. What will make a much bigger difference is in the trail generation tab. This velocity scale shoots these guys further out, Let's set that to set varying. And what I'll do is I'll start with the variation of 0, find a middle value that I like. Let's say right about there, 32. And then I keep taking this guy up until I have the amount of variation that I like. So probably around 15 or so, 18. I'm looking at these guys that are kind of close to the center. I don't want them getting too, slow. I do want them to shoot out a fair bit, but that adds a lot of variety right here. Let's also enable this directional noise. So we will turn that on. Amplitude is going to be 1.2, size maybe about 1.12 right there. And we could take this roughness down perhaps. So that will add even more noise to the whole thing. It gets a lot of these guys shooting along the ground as well, which can be nice. Okay, so what else do we have here? Let's also limit the length. And so with the limit max, we can actually trim off that velocity to a maximum value. So we don't want these guys shooting out too crazy. What I'll do is I'll basically just go down until I trim these guys off a slight bit like that. This is something that we'll have to dial in once we actually have the plume to look at, because we want these guys going beyond the plume by a slight bit. But for right now, we'll just keep that at 37. The drag and mass will add variety to how the actual little cones here are going to shoot outwards. And so with the drag, I'll leave that at 1 for right now. With the mass, I'll set this to about maybe 1.5 or so, and then say set varying. So that variation can then add even more along here, just depending on the mass of everything. So with this kind of stuff, it's good to just kind of eyeball something, see if you like something around there. You can always change the seed as well, so that gives you a general idea of what's going on. Let's say that our frames per second is at 30, and then if we go down to the bottom here, we can change the timing of everything. So this trail duration is how long everything lasts. If we say use attributes and then click on the dice icon right here, this is going to dictate how long these guys last. So in this case, I found that a middle value of 30, so middle value of 30 plus or minus perhaps 15 can really kind of cut these guys off pretty nicely. And we can just turn this up to see what works well shape-wise for this stuff. But I don't want the spikes curling downwards too much. The spikes are going to ideally not even be there before they start going down with gravity. So I'll turn this up until the arc is starting to turn down a slight bit, and that should work pretty well. So obviously all of these settings are going to be tweaked as we go along here. However, this gives us a good start. This gives you guys a good idea of what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to leave it at that for right now. Maybe we should take down our velocity scale just a tad bit right here, but for the most part, I think that this is looking pretty good. In the next video, let's move on to something else.